While the embedded narrative and the emergent narrative form more traditional forms of storytelling techniques, the evocative narrative is more akin to video game literacy than a storytelling tool. Or is it? I'm that nomad Chad, and I welcome you to the world of the evocative narrative.
This is crazy. Don't forget.
So what is the evocative narrative? The evocative narrative is focused on connotations, memories, and using preconceived knowledge of the player to tell a story. It is for this reason that I feel it leaned a little bit more into the category of video game literacy. Okay, so what exactly is video game literacy then? This is coded design language that is used to convey certain understandings of the world that the player inhabits. As someone who plays video games, I understand that the red barrel is an explosive. Objects that are red or green represent health, blue represents magic, and green also indicates stamina. I also know that certain markings in the world guide you on your intended path or indicate a hidden area to explore, or a lone save icon indicates a potential boss battle ahead. This is important because it allows developers to add depth to the game without having to explain it in great detail. Boss fights prove to be a great demonstration of this. In the Resident Evil series, bosses have a penchant for growing an obscene amount of unnecessary eyes. These serve as an excellent means of telegraphing the boss's weak point, because eyes are soft and squishy and don't like being pierced. By using this as a common thread throughout the series, it always gives the player an idea of what to look out for in boss fights. I'm sorry for all these puns. Please subscribe. But can this coded language be used to tell a story? Remember, the goal of the series is how the narrative informs the gameplay and how these pieces fit together to form the experience. So, can it be used to tell a story? The answer is yes. First, let's look at one of the crucial elements of storytelling, the theme.
Very interesting.
Themes are an abstract concept by nature, but to put things more simply, the theme is what the story believes in. It contains the underlying values, principles, or beliefs the story intends to express. A clear and recognizable theme will guide the choice of story content, deciding what kind of actions and events are relevant to the story's message, and which are not. Almost every story-driven game has some theme it wishes to convey to the player, but there is one game that I've experienced that evokes its core theme in the player.
The shadow hunting me. I must hurry.
Amnesia is a survival horror. It places the player in the shoes of Daniel, an amnesiac who awakens in the halls of Brennenburg Castle. The premise of the story is fairly simple. Figure out who Daniel is, kill a man named Alexander, and avoid the pursuing shadow.
You need to escape it as long as you can. Redeem us both, Daniel. Descend into the darkness where Alexander waits and murder him.
But why did Daniel make himself forget? This is where the central theme of the narrative kicks in. Amnesia's thematic narrative focuses on the fear of going insane. Insanity brought on at the cost of forbidden knowledge. This is the essence of cosmic or Lovecraftian horror, which was popularized by H.P. Lovecraft and emphasizes the horror of the unknowable and the resulting madness. Let's look at a few of the core themes we find in the genre, which Lovecraft actually laid out in supernatural horror in literature. Fear of the unknown and the unknowable. A contemplation of mankind's place in the vast, comfortless universe revealed by modern science, in which horror springs from the discovery of an appalling truth. Having protagonists who are helpless in the face of unfathomable and inescapable powers, which reduce humans from a privileged position to an insignificant and incompetence. And finally, the risks associated with scientific discovery. All of these tie into Amnesia's design a little too well. Each of these elements are used to evoke a sense of fear and unease as you traverse the castle. H.P. Lovecraft famously said, "The oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear, and the oldest and strongest kind of fear is fear of the unknown." The unknown is a huge component of Amnesia, and while I'd like to look at it later, I do want to emphasize the threat presented.
The shadow hunting me. I must hurry.
We know there is some force pursuing Daniel, which we cannot fight. This already gives the player a ton of knowledge. We know that we don't know what we're up against. More importantly, we can't fight back against this entity, which reduces our options to running and hiding. Combat, and specifically combat mechanics, have been in video games since the inception. Any popular horror games still have combat mechanics, forcing you to pick and choose your fights carefully. But when you strip the player of the ability to fight back, it pulls tension. You're on edge because you have no means to protect yourself. Logically, it only makes sense to keep moving and get out of this hell. The evocative narrative is built into the game's design. So how do you design insanity? Specifically, the fear of losing your mind. Amnesia uses a sanity meter and its phenomenal sound design to tap into your worst fears. Sanity is a mechanic unique to Amnesia. The more time you spend in the darkness or looking at enemies, Daniel's mental state declines. The only problem is that the castle is plunged in darkness. There are limited areas that provide light, with matches and oil for your lantern also being a scarce commodity. What makes preserving your sanity of such importance is the world around you becomes far more hostile, with more horrors inhabiting the halls as Daniel's mind begins to break. However, the game forces you to traverse the shadow in order to progress, with little knowledge of where you will find that warm glow or what else you might find in the dark. And this is where Frictional Games uses the sound design to turn this terrifying experience into a living nightmare. The game's sound design is quite muted, but there's a constant distorted droning which never relents. By doing this, the player feels hypersensitive to each of the sounds that permeates the castle, because we're aware of that entity in pursuit. Even in well-lit areas, there's no respite. There's only a perpetual sense of dread and anxiety. Insanity is not something that many people may have experienced. Yet Frictional Games have somehow found a way to make the player feel like they're losing their minds. The sound design builds this hypersensitivity and paranoia without any release of tension. What this does in the lit hallways is create a sensory dissonance, a discrepancy between your senses, specifically your sight and your hearing. And this is made much worse when you're forced to navigate the dark corridors. It feels like your senses are betraying you, and you don't know which one you can trust. Traditional horror audio cues are used to make you feel more paranoid and anxious as you discover the truth. Finally, by stripping the player of the ability to fight back, we're placed in that most vulnerable position against the horrors that lurk inside Brandenburg Castle. Amnesia: The Dark Descent is a masterclass in horror design and the evocative narrative. Through clever design choices, the player's video game literacy is weaponized against them to create a state of dread, anxiety, and paranoia. Without your traditional horror toolkit, the player is made vulnerable to the threats which lurk the passages of Brandenburg. Furthermore, your senses feel like they're betraying you as you uncover Daniel's truth. The game feels like you're losing your sanity the more you learn about his past. And this is the heart of the narrative and its theme. The fear that the game evokes within the player is the same fear that is tied to Daniel's past, the same fear he wanted to forget.
He went to take care of the farmhands. I began to look for the children.
The evocative narrative may be considered a part of video game literacy, but it can be a powerful storytelling tool to evoke a particular emotion and create a distinct experience. While many games make use of the evocative narrative, horror games such as Amnesia thrive on it, forcing the player character to experience the same terror the protagonist is facing. Next time, we look at how the player constructs the hero of the journey they face. What will you become to achieve your goals in the realm of the enacted narrative? As always, I am that lost soul. I am that wandering wanderer. I am that nomad Shad. If you enjoyed this, be sure to check out my previous video on how gameplay directs the narrative right after this.